Can anyone stop the Oklahoma City Thunder? I've got some teams that we should look for to see who could give them the best run for their money. Then Cooper Flagg is a Dallas Maverick. Will that elevate the team, or were they doomed from the start? Then we'll look into the deals between Aspiration and Kawhi Leonard and the Los Angeles Clippers, as well as the NBA's gambling scandal, and get official statements. And then finally, I've got my top performer from last season. Y'all ready? Let's go. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Control Room. I'm your host, Esrael Johannes. We are back for Season 3, and the NBA is better than ever. So congratulations to the Oklahoma City Thunder for winning the NBA title last season. Let's look at the bracket from the playoffs real quick, just to finalize what we got to see. Oklahoma City Thunder defeated the Indiana Pacers 4-3 in the 2025 NBA Finals. Of course, that had to do with Tyrese Halliburton's injury to his right Achilles. It was torn in that game. He had 9 points in 7 minutes. A very unfortunate injury, and so that was something that played a factor. We can't discredit, though, the way that the Thunder had played all season long, as well as throughout the entirety of that series, and especially in Game 7, despite Indiana giving them a run for their money in that last game. We have to look at how OKC won it all. It starts with their MVP, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. In the 2025 NBA Finals against the Pacers, he scored 30.3 points on 44.3% shooting overall, 91.4% from the free throw line, had 5.6 assists, 1.9 steals, and 1.6 blocks. He is one of 10 players to average 30 or more points in an NBA Finals series since 2000. Now, the two games that were very consequential for the Thunder that they had to win were Games 4 and, of course, Game 7. And Shai had the biggest impact in those games. In Game 4 against the Pacers in Indiana, he had 35 points on 12 of 24 shooting, 10 of 10 from the free throw line, 0 assists, 3 steals, and 1 block. It was his only perfect game from the stripe in the finals. It was his first game with 0 assists since August 14th, 2020, and the first game ever in the postseason with 0 assists. OKC ended the game on a 12-1 run and won the game by 7. So this was because of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just taking the ball and scoring at will. In Game 7, a bit of a different story. He had 29 points on 8 of 27 shooting. That was a series worst 29.6%. He shot 11 of 12 from the free throw line, 91.7%, had 12 assists, 1 steal, and 2 blocks. It was his first game ever in the postseason with 12 or more assists. So his teammates were able to step up, especially at home, since Game 7 was played in Oklahoma City. Those 12 assists were crucial in keeping the Pacers at bay as they were making their comeback in the second half. Now, who is probably the most consequential teammate that played really well in the finals? There are, of course, 2 of them, but we're going to start with the one that had more of an offensive firepower. That was Jalen Williams, better known as J-Dub. In Game 5 against the Pacers, which we covered in a previous episode in Season 2, he had a playoff career high, 40 points on 14 of 25 shooting, which is 56%. That's also the 14 field goals made, a new playoff career high. 3 of 5 shooting from 3, 9 of 12 from the free throw line, 6 rebounds, and 1 steal. That arrival of J-Dub, playing through a torn ligament in his right wrist, his shooting wrist, was crucial in keeping the Thunder in front of the Pacers near the end of that series. Remember, Indiana had series leads at 1-0 and 2-1, and the Thunder had to win on the road in Game 4, which we mentioned in the previous graphic. And then J-Dub closed the door with a 3-2 series lead on his 40-point night. And of course, Shai also had a 30-point game in that game as well. And then, of course, we know the rest of the series. Indy won Game 6, forced to Game 7. We know that story. Now, it's not just J-Dub that had a big impact. Of course, Chet Holmgren is the other key piece to this puzzle. And it was more so about his defense than it was his offense. In the 2025 NBA Finals against the Pacers, Chet Holmgren had 12.3 points on 85.2% free throw shooting. His field goal percentage was not great, I will admit that. He had 8.9 rebounds per game, 1.6 blocks per game. He held opponents to 43% shooting overall, and his defensive rating over those 7 games was 100.9. He led the finals in rebounding, not just this year, but also last year's finals. And by last year, I mean 2024 NBA Finals between Dallas and Boston. Luka led the series in rebounding with 8.8. Chet was more at 8.9 the following year. His field goal defense was the 6th best among players who played all 7 finals games. And he had the 3rd best 3-point field goal defense at 32%. He held opponents to 32% shooting from 3. His 100.9 defensive rating was the best defensive rating among players with 15 or more minutes per game. As I'm detailing these stats, I'm really just making the case, the strong case as to why the Oklahoma City Thunder are as unstoppable as they are. And it's not just Shai, it's not just J-Dub, it's not just Chet, because you can't win a title with just a big 3. You need role players to step up as many times as the Thunder role players stepped up. So let's look at the role players for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I've got 5 of them on this list. It wasn't just these 5, but these 5 are the most prominent. Alex Caruso, we'll start off with him. 10.1 points on 43.4% shooting overall, 40% from 3. And he led the finals with 2.4 steals per game. Luguentz Dort scored 8.1 points on 44.7% shooting from 3. And he also added 1.6 steals per game. Isaiah Hartenstein had 7.6 screen assist points per game, shot 60.9% overall, had 6.7 rebounds per game, 13.3% offensive rebounding percentage, and a 2.29 assist to turnover ratio. All of those were the most among players with 10 or more minutes per game in the finals. And then Cason Wallace scored 6 points on 47.4% shooting overall with 1.7 steals per game. Then Aaron Wiggins added 5.9 points on 45.5% shooting from 3, playing 14.3 minutes per game in the finals. This team was so deep. I mean, there were so many players that you could lean on, and that was evident, not just this past season, but the season before. And of course, beefing up your roster with Caruso and Hartenstein just added to the mix. Most of those guys are coming back. They're only losing one guy. We've already seen it in the first 2 games of this NBA season, how much that depth matters for them. Now let's look at the Thunder's legendary season. We saw this air at the very end of the finals. The most wins in a season in NBA history, including the playoffs. At the very top, the Golden State Warriors from 2015-2016 had 88, but infamously lost that finals to the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Chicago Bulls of 1995-96 won 87 games, which was the same year they went 72-10 in the regular season. They ended up winning the championship that year. The Chicago Bulls of 1996-97, who also won the title that year, won 84 games. And then tying those Bulls in 97, the Oklahoma City Thunder of 2024-25 had 84 wins among the regular season and postseason. Now, some interesting stats that I really, really liked from Scott Van Pelt's show the night that the Thunder won the championship. I kept a screenshot of that because I wanted to reference it. It was so mind-boggling to me how dominant the Thunder were all season long. I could see it, not just with the eye test, but through the numbers. And this was probably one of the better measurements to showcase that production. So the Thunder from last season were the first to win the title with the NBA MVP since the 2014-2015 Golden State Warriors with Stephen Curry. They were 19-2 following a loss, including the playoffs, which was the best in a season in NBA history. And then I verified this with Sport Radar. They had a plus 259 playoff point differential at home, which was the best in a single postseason all time. That's domination, especially at home. And the way that the Pacers were even able to steal a game in the way that they did, they only led for 0.3 seconds in game 1. They didn't win game 2. They didn't win game 5. They didn't win game 7. That's how dominant the Thunder were at home. It took a Tyrese Halliburton game winner to prevent OKC from basically sweeping the Indiana Pacers at home, if that makes sense. Now, let's look at SGA's season to remember, because he did something so historic that it's only happened with 3 other guys. The only players to win MVP, Finals MVP, and the scoring title in NBA history. Started with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar with Milwaukee in 1971. Michael Jordan did it for Chicago in 4 different seasons. Then Shaquille O'Neal with the Los Angeles Lakers in 2000. And of course, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander with OKC in 2025. If it wasn't obvious how good the Oklahoma City Thunder were, it should be obvious now. I think I've built a strong enough case for why they are almost the most unstoppable team going into this season. They are favorites for a reason. And of course, I mentioned almost everyone's back on this Oklahoma City roster. So who can dethrone the Thunder? I've got some teams that we should look out for in the next segment. The Thunder may be heavy favorites to win it all again this season, but we've had 7 different champions in 7 straight years. So what gives? Is there somebody that can take them down? Possibly. History says it's likely, but we're going to have to look at the field. So let's start with the Eastern Conference. In the 2024-25 season, there were 2 60-win teams in the East. For the first time in a season since 2008-2009. That belonged to Cleveland and to Boston. Now, the challengers in the East, of course, Boston is dealing with Jason Tatum's Achilles injuries. There are also other injuries that we've mentioned before, Tyrese Halliburton with his Achilles, but there are guys coming back for other teams. So who are the potential teams in the East that could be a challenger to Oklahoma City if they were to meet them in the finals? What I'm going to show is not every team that I think could be a threat, because I can only fit 5 in a graphic, but these are 5 of the more prominent ones. Starting with the Cleveland Cavaliers, who had 64 wins last season. Then the New York Knicks, who happened to get a new coach in Mike Brown, made their first Eastern Conference Finals appearance since 2000. The Atlanta Hawks acquired Kristaps Porzingis and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and they're returning Jalen Johnson from that shoulder injury he suffered last year. The Orlando Magic acquired Desmond Bane and Tyus Jones, and they also extended Paolo Banchero and Mo Wagner. The Philadelphia 76ers drafted VJ Edgecombe with the number 3 overall pick from my Baylor Bears, and they're returning Joel Embiid from injury, and they also re-signed Quentin Grimes for a year. So they have depth at the point guard position with Tyrese Maxey, with Quentin Grimes, and of course Edgecombe is going to be that combo guard who is just out of this world right now. 34 points in a season opener. The record for a Sixer. Kind of nuts. Now let's move on to the Western Conference, because there are some other teams, of course, in the East that we'll get to, like Milwaukee and so on and so forth, but we will spend the rest of the season looking at these teams. I'm not just capping it at these 5. But now on to the West. In the Western Conference last year, it was the second straight season with 5 50-win teams in the West. That was the first time since 3 straight seasons from 2012-2013 to 2014-2015. And 2 of those 3 seasons, the West had 7 50-win teams. And it was back-to-back seasons as well. So the West is way more loaded than the East, not a good sign for the Thunder because they will probably face the toughest competition earlier in the postseason. Who are some of the challengers in the West? Of course, again, not all of them, but just some of them. I think there is one that we really need, at least one or two that we really need to hone in on before we see the rest of the field. That, to me, is the Houston Rockets. And I'm not just saying that because everyone else is saying that. Houston has been giving Oklahoma City a lot of trouble over the last several seasons. And this time, they now have Kevin Durant. So let's look at some of their stats from last season and see how much better they've gotten since this past offseason. Last year, the Rockets had an average of 48.5 rebounds per game, which was first. They also were first in the NBA with 14.6 offensive rebounds per game. They shot a league worst 73.8% from the free throw line, so Kevin Durant will help there. They had an offensive rating of 114.9, which was 12th, a defensive rating of 110.3, which was 5th. They had 18.1 second chance points per game, which was first. Again, if you have the most offensive rebounds, you're probably going to have the most second chance points. And then they held opponents to 15.8 points off turnovers, which was 4th in the NBA. So how good are the Houston Rockets? Their offseason transactions are a key sign as to how much better they've gotten, of course. So let's start at the top. They acquired Kevin Durant. They got Clint Capella. That was in a NBA record 7-team trade. They signed Fred VanVleet, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Jabari Smith Jr. to multi-year contracts. They signed Jayshawn Tate, Aaron Holiday, Jeff Green, and Josh Okogie to short deals. But of course, Fred VanVleet is now out for the season with a torn right ACL. The Houston Rockets' net rating was up plus 3.9 with Fred VanVleet last season. Now, KD is a great get, but there's not really a point guard. That was a problem with Phoenix, even though they had Tyus Jones for a year, because they essentially gave up on the guy halfway through the season. And if that was the biggest problem for Phoenix, not being able to distribute the ball among a starting lineup of great shooters, then who's to say that won't be Houston's problem this time around? So should the offense roll through Alperen Şengün? It seems a little counterintuitive to not have a point guard to have the offense run through a center, but we've seen Denver do that every single year. And Şengün has that kind of touch that Jokic does. He plays a very similar style. Şengün last season, with and without Fred VanVleet, is somewhat similar in the numbers, but there's a bit of a variance there. So with VanVleet, and when I say with and without, it's games when VanVleet played versus games in which he did not suit up. With VanVleet, he scored 19.4 points per game on 48.4% shooting overall. He had 10.3 rebounds per game, 5 assists per game, and 1.3 steals per game. Without VanVleet, he scored 18.6 points on 52.2% shooting overall, 11.1 rebounds, 4.7 assists, and 0.8 steals per game, and was named a 2025 NBA All-Star for the first time in his career. To me, I do think that the offense needs to roll through Şengün. Of course, Amen Thompson is someone who could facilitate the ball, even though he's a much bigger type of guard. He's not really a guard. They didn't have a guard in the starting lineup against Oklahoma City in game 1 of this year. So if there's anyone who can distribute the ball to Kevin Durant to get his own shot, to maybe get some of the other guys going, it might have to be Şengün if there's not going to be a point guard. Now, one thing about Houston, I've mentioned already, they really give OKC trouble. It's not going to seem crazy with the numbers I'm going to show you right now, but it is evident in the way that they play each other versus when OKC plays anyone else. So I'm going to show this graphic on the screen in the point of view of the Thunder. So the Thunder versus the Rockets last year, and this is all last season, scored only 120.2 points. That seems like an oxymoron to say only 120.2 points on 47.8 shooting overall, 38.2% shooting from three, 42.4 rebounds per game, 25.6 assists per game, and they had a combined 14.4 steals and blocks per game. That's stocks per game. Against all the other teams in the NBA, the Thunder scored 120.5 points per game on 48.2% shooting overall. They shot 37.4% from three, averaged 44.9 rebounds per game, had 26.9 assists per game, and averaged 16.1 stocks per game. And so, of those 6 categories, only the three-point shooting was better against the Rockets and everything else went down in terms of playing against Houston versus playing against all these other teams. It seemed more evident years ago than it does now, but it's just something. There's something about rivalries. And I would say OKC and Houston could be a rivalry, especially if they meet in the postseason. It's just something about a certain matchup where a team that is expected to play well no matter what tends to falter a little bit. There's just something about that other team that gets them and that gets in the way. Houston is one of those teams for OKC. Now, who else took OKC to the brink? The finals were not the first 7-game series OKC had last year. That belonged to the Denver Nuggets, and I think the Nuggets have a case for potentially taking the Thunder down. So let's look at their offseason additions. They lost 4-3 to the OKC Thunder in the Western Conference semifinals. Since then, they've traded for Cameron Johnson, who shot 39% from three or better in 5 of his 6 NBA seasons. They signed Bruce Brown to a 1-year, $3.1 million deal, who also won the 2023 NBA championship with the Denver Nuggets. They also added Tim Hardaway Jr. and Jonas Valanciunas, and David Adelman is now beginning his first full season as head coach. It's not out of the question that the Nuggets, now that they have added more pieces to their depth, could give the Thunder a serious run for their money. Of course, one of those wins that they got in Oklahoma City was a huge 3 from Aaron Gordon near the end of the game. Of course, Chet Holmgren missed a free throw that ended up giving Denver the lead once that 3 was hit. So sometimes you need room for that kind of error in a series, and that can swing it one way or the other. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, of course, had something to say about that in Game 4. So it's not just that, the Nuggets have depth and suddenly they can beat the Thunder. That's not the case. The play on the court is still what matters the most. But they now have a better chance than they did before because Game 7 was a rout. They had no gas left. Aaron Gordon was hurt. If there were other pieces that they could lean on, that the Nuggets could lean on, maybe it would be a different story. And so this is just about giving themselves a chance when that time comes. And I think they've given themselves the best chance since they won the title in 2023. Some other challengers in the West belong to the Minnesota Timberwolves, who extended Julius Randle and Naz Reid. The San Antonio Spurs, my goodness, do they look so good to start the season. They drafted Dylan Harper to join the 2024-25 Rookie of the Year Stephon Castle. And this will now be the first full season with De'Aaron Fox and Victor Wembanyama. Wemby's already back from that deep vein thrombosis he was suffering from in his shoulder. De'Aaron Fox is currently sidelined with an injury. He will be back soon. But the Spurs frighten me with the way that Wemby's playing right now. Alien is not enough of a term to describe what he's doing on the court. That's just insane with the amount of blocks he's generating. I think he had 9 blocks against New Orleans. The season opener against Dallas was nothing short of special with the 40-point game. I don't know who can stop the Spurs, but let me just move on before I get too ahead of myself. The New Orleans Pelicans acquired Jordan Poole and Kevon Looney, drafted Jeremiah Fears, Derek Queen, and Micah Peavy. Of course, Zion Williamson's coming back. They traded away Brandon Ingram to Toronto, who could be a sleeper in the East as well. They're bringing back Herb Jones, one of their best defenders. Trey Murphy III is one of their best shooters. Jordan Hawkins is a great shooter off the bench. Jose Alvarado is a spark plug off the bench. I mean, that dude can just get everyone going with his hustle. He has a lot of hustle. There are a lot of pieces in New Orleans, and if they can just find a way to make it cohesive under Willie Green, they have a shot of finally being the team that we expected them to be if healthy. But again, health is going to be the number one factor. That's been the derailment for New Orleans for a while. Then Golden State finally signed Jonathan Kuminga, and then they brought in Al Horford. And the Lakers extended Luka Doncic, added Marcus Smart, and DeAndre Ayton. Of course, Luka was the one who lobbied for those two guys to get added to the roster. It's not just these 5 teams, of course. It's not just Denver and Houston. You could add Memphis to this list. Portland is a team that I believe could surprise a lot of people as well, despite all of the shenanigans that we will discuss later. But the West is so stacked. The Spurs, of course, at the top of that list among the Rockets and Nuggets, that could really be a thorn in the Thunder's side. Is it a foregone conclusion that the Thunder can win the 2026 NBA championship? I do not think so, because of all of these teams in the West and, of course, some of the teams in the East. Now, there's a team I haven't mentioned, a team that I've covered for so long. What about the Dallas Mavericks? Do they have any chance now that they have Cooper Flagg? Or is it just a pipe dream? I'll get into that in the next segment. This is the biggest story in the South. Cooper Flagg, out of Duke, is a Dallas Maverick. How in the world did they get the number 1 pick? Beyond me. 1.8% chance. I mean, t-shirts were made out of it because it was just so improbable that we now had two straight years where a team with similar odds ended up getting the number 1 pick. Atlanta got that last year and ended up drafting Shai. And so now the Mavericks are the second straight team. Meanwhile, 2 years ago, when Victor Wembanyama was the lottery pick, a team that was actually in the bottom 5 in the San Antonio Spurs was awarded that number 1 pick. So here we are with Cooper Flagg as a Dallas Maverick. Let's look at his last 12 months and see why the hype was so real. Last season with Duke, he was the 2024-25 National Player of the Year, the 2024-25 National Rookie of the Year, a consensus first-team All-American, as well as the ACC Player of the Year and Rookie of the Year. He reached the 2025 Final Four at the Alamo Dome, was drafted number 1 overall by Dallas as the second youngest number 1 overall pick ever, behind LeBron James. And then in the 2025 preseason with the Mavericks, he scored 10.7 points on 37% shooting, 36.4% from 3, 5.3 rebounds, 2.7 assists, and 1.7 steals. Where does Cooper Flagg really fit the best? And how does he affect AD? Because Cooper is not a point guard. By trying to make him a point guard, it's almost as if the Mavericks knew that letting go of Luka Doncic was a bad idea. But that is neither here nor there. Where is Flagg the most usable? As the Swiss Army knife. He averaged 6 points in the second quarter in the preseason. So that was the second most among all rookies and the most among rookies playing more than 1 game in the preseason. It's noticeable, especially in the first 2 games of the season, but this should be expected that Cooper will have a passive approach early because he doesn't want to step on anyone's toes. That's normal for someone just coming in and playing with a lot more experienced guys, especially some guys who've won a championship in Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving, who, of course, is dealing with the ACL tear. So he's not on the court, but he's in the building. So then what should the Mavericks do? How does Cooper let the game come to him and produce well, right? AD is there to alleviate the scoring burden. That is who the Mavericks traded Luka Doncic away for. So it has to be on Anthony Davis to be the one leading the scoring. And there are multiple types of actions that the Mavericks can run to get all of these guys involved because it is so positionless. But there does seem to be a lack of cohesion because there isn't a point guard. Something just seems a little bit off. We'll address the point guard situation in a moment. But first, let's look at AD with his stats. Last season with the Lakers and the Mavericks, including the play-in games. Last year, Anthony Davis played 53 games and scored 25.1 points per game on 51.5% shooting overall, only 29.2% from three, averaged 11.5 rebounds per game, and 2.2 blocks per game. He had 20 30-point games last season, 18 of them with the Lakers and 2 of them with Dallas, including the 40-point game in the play-in loss to Memphis. He had 36 double-doubles all season, 1 triple-double, which came with the Mavericks, and that was his 4th triple-double in his career. Statistically, it seems like Anthony Davis can be the biggest factor for the Mavericks. I mean, he has to be. He is the biggest guy on the court. He is the most dominant player on the court. He needs to be the guy that is the most impactful. But he also needs his team to be fully healthy, including a point guard. The point guard that we are referencing now is Kyrie Irving, who's dealing with the ACL injury. He won't be back until probably the start of the next calendar year, but I don't think he'll fully be himself until March, which last March was when he tore his ACL. So let's look at his numbers from last season and see how effective he was before he tore his ACL. Kyrie Irving scored 24.7 points per game on 47.3% shooting overall, 40.1% from three, 91.6% from the free throw line, averaged 4.6 assists and 1.3 steals per game. He had 14 games where he scored 30 or more points, and then unfortunately suffered that torn ACL March 3rd versus the Sacramento Kings. Of course, a lot of Kyrie's season stats from last year come in a time where Luka was there, where he was playing. There were plenty of games in which Luka wasn't playing, but a lot of, if you notice the 4.6 assists, that is because Luka had the ball in his hands for half of that time. So it's not that Kyrie can't generate 7 or 8 assists. It's just that Kyrie didn't have to. This is a different team now. But to lay it all on Kyrie, as I mentioned right before he tore his ACL, it is so unfair to him. I mean, this has to be a cohesive unit from top to bottom. The bench and the depth have to be good. So let's look at Dallas's depth in the meantime while they wait for Kyrie to come back. The other key contributors from last season include Klay Thompson, who scored 14 points per game on 39.1% shooting from three and 90.5% from the free throw line. He was probably the most available player because he played 72 games last season. Then Najee Marshall scored 13.2 points per game on 50.8% shooting overall and averaged 1 steal per game. PJ Washington scored 14.7 points per game on 45.3% shooting overall, 38.1% from three, and had 7.8 rebounds per game. Derek Lively II had 8.7 points on 70.2% shooting overall, 7.5 rebounds per game, and 1.6 blocks per game. And of course, Lively had that issue with his foot and his ankle, so he did not play for more than half the season. But then Daniel Gafford had 12.3 points per game on 70.2% shooting overall. That is not a typo. Lively and Gafford had the same shooting percentage for the season. Then Gafford had 6.8 rebounds per game and 1.8 blocks per game. And on top of that, the Mavericks added D'Angelo Russell and Dennis Smith Jr., who both play the point guard position. Could Dallas beat OKC in a 7-game series? After everything I just mentioned, my early indication is no. No, I don't think the Dallas Mavericks, even at full strength, could beat the Oklahoma City Thunder. Even with Cooper Flagg, even if Kyrie comes back fully healthy and is back to superstar Kyrie, I don't think that they can beat the Thunder. However, there are some weaknesses for the Thunder in terms of the corner three-point shooting. That's where the Mavs have killed them. The Mavericks have been a thorn in the Thunder's side as well, even when it seems like they shouldn't be. They just happen to be. However, it takes that level of focus, that three-point shooting in the corner, the ability to out-rebound the Thunder is also very, very key. The turnovers and limiting them as much as possible is very important because OKC is going to force a lot of turnovers. One of the biggest problems since Luka was traded away was that the Mavericks keep turning the ball over. It is astronomically higher than when Luka was on the roster. So this is going to be a problem for the foreseeable future, and it's something that I really think is going to be what derails the Mavericks more than anything else. If they can't clean up their turnovers, they're not even making the playoffs. That is how far I think the Mavericks can fall. Their ceiling is much higher than that, though. So it's about cleaning up their level of play. But as of right now, I would not put Dallas as a contender to beat OKC in a 7-game series. So now let's move on to a crazy story between Kawhi Leonard, the LA Clippers, and this company called Aspiration. Bit of a wild story in the next segment. This might be one of the biggest stories we've seen in the offseason for the NBA. Pablo Torre, through Pablo Torre Finds Out, his podcast, led a 7-month investigation into a company called Aspiration and their deals between the LA Clippers and Kawhi Leonard. Now, I'm going to try to keep as much of this information as what I have on these graphics because they are pulled directly from these sources. If I step too far out of line, it could be a problem. So let's just leave it to where the story is right now. The story so far, according to Pablo Torre, Kawhi Leonard signs a 3-year, $103 million deal with the LA Clippers on July 10th, 2019. The max offer from the Clippers was 4 years for $141 million. He re-signed on August 12th, 2021 on a 4-year, $176.3 million deal. Steve Ballmer then invests $50 million into Aspiration on September 14th, 2021. 13 days later, September 27th, 2021, the Clippers and Aspiration agree to a $300 million founding partnership, which later was reported to have been approved by the NBA. Then Kawhi Leonard and Aspiration reached an apparent 4-year, $48 million no-show deal in April of 2022. $28 million of that was to be paid in cash, paid quarterly, and $20 million of that was supposed to be paid in equity, meaning stock in the company. The $20 million equity deal was reported by the Boston Sports Journal one day after Pablo Torre reported the original $28 million no-show job. Okay. The Clippers and Steve Ballmer invested how much? It's not just $50 million. There's more, okay? The investments into Aspiration from LA Clippers executives. Starting in September 2021, Ballmer LLC invests $50 million. In April 2022, the LA Clippers fund $3 million in carbon credits, which was how Aspiration was selling their service. In the same month, the Clippers funded another $32 million in carbon credits. In June of 2022, the Clippers funded another $21 million in carbon credits. In December 2022, Wong's LLC, Wong is Dennis Wong, the other owner of the Clippers, the minority owner of the LA Clippers, invested $2 million. And then in March 2023, Ballmer's LLC invested $10 million again. So that is $118 million in 18 months. Now, the paper trail of this entire story, Pablo Torre lines out in extreme detail. I think it's really good to check out his episodes, his show, to get the full picture as to what's going on with this story. He seemed to have uncovered something extra, another charitable uncovering, if you will. Steve Ballmer's donation to a charity. In November of 2024, the Ballmer Group made a grant of $1.875 million to the Golden State Opportunity Foundation, otherwise known as GSO. GSO was founded by Joe Sandberg, who happens to be the co-founder of Aspiration. This was the fourth grant sent by the Ballmer Group to GSO since 2018. Sandberg stepped down as GSO chairman on March 4th, 2025, after being arrested for wire fraud the day before. He agreed to plead guilty on August 21st, 2025, according to the Department of Justice. And as of October 21st, 2025, which was the season opener for the NBA, he formally pleaded guilty. So all of these details are important to remember. Because what did Steve Ballmer say to Ramona Shelburne for that ESPN sit-down interview again? This happened September 4th of this year. Steve Ballmer said, "We hadn't even introduced, Aspiration hadn't asked, and we hadn't introduced, for sure, Kawhi to Aspiration. We were done. They were done. We were done with Kawhi. We were done with Aspiration. The deals were all locked and loaded. Then they did request to be introduced to Kawhi. Under the rules, we can introduce our sponsors to our athletes. We just can't be involved. We made an introduction. That was in early November, well past when all of this happens." Again, he finishes by saying, "The allegations have not been true, but what's most important to me is we've done the right thing in all those interactions. You know, Kawhi's business is Kawhi's business, but we've always done the right thing." So the Clippers have done the right thing? That's what he's trying to say, right? Then the Wall Street Journal reported this Sunday, October 19th. Quote, "In December 2021, Sandberg told a high-ranking Aspiration executive that the Clippers had approached him about doing a deal with Leonard, their injured star. The executive recalled Sandberg saying, 'This is important to the Clippers.'" So what you're telling me is that Steve Ballmer allegedly, again, this is all alleged. I'm not going to just sit here and say this is 100% fact. I didn't do the reporting. But allegedly, Steve Ballmer lied to everyone's faces. Am I surprised? No. However, when the Wall Street Journal reports this, which is in direct contradiction to his interview with Ramona Shelburne at ESPN, it's a really bad look for the Clippers. So what could possibly go wrong if the NBA decides the Clippers did something wrong here in terms of circumventing the salary cap? Because that is a big no-no in sports that have a salary cap. The last time something like this happened to this degree, and this is honestly a much higher degree than the precedent that was set, the Minnesota Timberwolves had a scandal with Joe Smith. The Minnesota Timberwolves and Joe Smith agreed to a series of secret contracts worth $86 million over 7 years. Minnesota was fined $3.5 million and forfeited 5 first-round picks. Owner Glenn Taylor was suspended, and the VP of basketball operations, Kevin McHale, took unpaid leave. Because Taylor and McHale took those punishments, the Minnesota Timberwolves' 2003 first-round pick was restored. And then Joe Smith, whose contract was voided as a result of this punishment, went on to sign a 1-year deal worth $2.25 million with Detroit. So that's the precedent that was set. This is much, much, much worse. If it is found that the allegations are true and that the NBA does need to punish the Clippers because there is going to be a third party who decides whether or not Adam Silver will have the power to punish the Clippers, then Adam Silver will need to lay the hammer down. There is no going about it. The scale and deliberate nature of this alleged circumvention are factors that to me are way too large to ignore. It's not really just to me. I think everybody across the league understands that this is going to be the most consequential decision, at least that's what we thought up until this week, for the NBA and for the commissioner. But now something even crazier happened that had to extend the time that I was going to put this episode out. Because a few people got arrested for a gambling scandal. We're going to break that down in the next segment. Not even 48 hours into this NBA season, there's already another crazy story. The FBI has now gotten involved, and it's kind of getting out of hand. Here's the details from the FBI indictment that was released Thursday morning. Portland Trail Blazers coach Chauncey Billups, Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier, and former Cleveland Cavaliers player and assistant coach Damon Jones have been arrested as part of a pair of wide-ranging investigations related to illegal sports betting and rigged poker games backed by the mafia, authorities announced Thursday. The defendants had access to private information known by NBA players or NBA coaches that would likely affect the outcome of games or players' performances, and provided that information to other co-conspirators in exchange for either a flat fee or a share of betting profits, according to the indictment. That comes from the ESPN article written by David Purdom. The NBA's response says, "We are in the process of reviewing the federal indictments announced today. Terry Rozier and Chauncey Billups are being placed on immediate leave from their teams, and we will continue to cooperate with the relevant authorities. We take these allegations with the utmost seriousness, and the integrity of our game remains our top priority," according to Tim Perrone of NBC News. The Portland Trail Blazers also released a statement following the FBI indictment. "We are aware of the allegations involving head coach Chauncey Billups, and the Trail Blazers are fully cooperating with the investigation. Billups has been placed on immediate leave, and Thiago Splitter will assume head coaching duties in the interim. Any further questions should be directed to the NBA," according to Gavin Lasig of NBC News. So why are these players really betting the house? Why are these individuals really are betting the house? It just seems a little bit odd to me that they are getting themselves entangled with the mafia. Forgive me if I'm naive. I didn't realize they were still so prominent in the 2020s. But my God, this is out of hand. What the FBI is bringing in terms of charges, again, everything alleged, nothing's been convicted. I'm just talking about what's being reported. So understand that I am not putting my name out there as I've investigated this. That is not me. I am just taking whatever sources have already reported on this and putting it on the show. The federal charges brought by the FBI on Thursday include 1 count each of wire fraud conspiracy and money laundering conspiracy for Chauncey Billups, 1 count each of wire fraud conspiracy and money laundering conspiracy for Terry Rozier, and 2 counts each of wire fraud conspiracy and money laundering conspiracy for Damon Jones. Each of those counts carries up to 20 years in prison. So Chauncey has 2 counts total. Terry Rozier has 2 counts total. Damon Jones has 4 counts total. Some of these guys might be dead by the time a maximum sentence went down for all of these counts, possibly. Why? It does not make sense to me why someone of that caliber, who has that amount of capital, that amount of wealth, finds themselves involved in some form of way with the mafia. I can't get over that fact. Why are you helping the mafia? What kind of lifestyle do NBA players and coaches go through? This is probably why Adam Silver has expressed that he wants to remove prop bets from the NBA, because that has a lot to do with how some of these bets were made, including Terry Rozier's situation with the Charlotte Hornets, which is another key part of this investigation from March 23rd, 2023. No matter what comes of this is a stain on the league because it directly affects how people view the integrity of the game. If they know that players are manipulating the game in some way because of prop bets happening outside of the league, then what is the competition in the sport? Is it real? Are we watching the real product? Or are we watching some butchered version of it because there's all this gambling money involved? The Mafia apparently generated $7 million over 2 years with help from Chauncey Billups, but he just signed an extension for an additional 2 seasons after getting his 5th-year option picked up. The reported salary in 2024-25, according to Oregon Live, was $4.7 million. So you generated more than half of the amount you generated for the Mafia in the same time frame, because it's $7 million over 2 years, but $4.7 million you earned legitimately as the coach of the Blazers. Why take on so much risk? I still cannot for the life of me understand it. And of course, there is probably something bigger. I think I saw De'Arca Hamby tweet how it's not really about the money. It's more so about the adrenaline, the addiction of gambling. And that is a pervasive problem in the NBA and, of course, sports in general, but also in life. It just, I don't want to come off as a purist here. It just feels wrong to risk what generates so much for you for something that has the same amount of value in your eyes. It's not even $7 million for you. It's $7 million for the Mafia. You're not getting all $7 million of that. What's the point? I don't get it. I just don't get it. So for me, this is a big reminder to just not gamble at all. It's something that I choose not to do. But especially if it comes with the Mafia, just don't mess with the Mafia. All right? Forgive the thunder, the literal thunder that's rolling outside my window. But this is just how it feels to be reading all this information. I can't believe it for the life of me. And I'm sure you can't either. So now let's just move on to the top performer for 2024-25 and finally celebrate the closing of that season. That's coming up in the next segment. If you've made it this far, welcome to the postgame. Let's finally close out last season and show the top performer for the year. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and his achievements last season won MVP, the Finals MVP, and the scoring title. Became the 4th player to win all 3 in the same season in NBA history. Last year was his 3rd All-NBA first-team selection and his 3rd All-Star selection. He had a career-high 32.7 points per game, which led the league, and was the highest scoring season for an NBA champion. It was also his 3rd straight season with 45 or more 30-point games. He became the 3rd player in NBA history to have that feat, including Wilt Chamberlain and Michael Jordan. Now that chapter's closed and we're on to a new season, we've got some new rules that you should probably be aware of, and you might have already seen throughout the first several days of the NBA season. Starting off with this thing called the heave rule. Any shot taken at least 36 feet away from the basket within the final 3 seconds of the first 3 quarters will count as a team shot and not an individual one. Notably, the play must have started in the backcourt for the rule to apply. This is so that players who are incentivized to have a higher three-point shooting percentage are more likely to take those shots that have astronomically low rates of conversion. And who knows, maybe a team actually benefits from that, although only 4% of those shots apparently were converted last year. Now moving on to the second rule here is the high five rule. If a defender makes follow-through contact with a shooter's hand, wrist, or arm after the ball has been released, it will be called as a foul. We've seen this happen time and time again with Steph Curry, where he is trying to finish his follow-through and he can't because there is a hand in the way, which used to legally be allowed, but it does affect the follow-through. And when you affect the follow-through, you end up affecting the shot. So that seems to be something that Steve Kerr was lobbying for because it just kept happening to Steph over and over. He's still getting fouled on 3-point shots, and the refs are not calling it, but that is neither here nor there. However, this is just something that players have to be aware of, that refs now have a point of contention here with this high five rule. And it probably could be ruled as approximate foul. Maybe not approximate foul, but as a foul that probably could have occurred that could be found in a challenge. Not exactly sure as to how the refs will play that out. Speaking of challenges, the third rule here that we're going to mention is the coach's challenge. Previously, an on-court crew chief would determine whether approximate foul should have been called on an out-of-bounds violation. But now, a replay center official will make the decision. That's mainly to expedite the process and make things go a little bit faster. We don't want to get stuck in a situation where we're spending 5 minutes on a review because it kind of seems unnecessary. All right, those are the 3 NBA rules to look out for this upcoming season, some changes that have happened since the last offseason. In the next episode, we've got some early looks for a lot of good NBA teams, and we are going to preview the NBA Cup because it returns October 31st on Prime. Now we've got the upcoming schedule for the NBA. Starting with Monday, October 27th, the Cleveland Cavaliers will play the Detroit Pistons at 7 p.m. Eastern on Peacock, followed by the Nuggets and the Timberwolves at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on Peacock. Tuesday, October 28th, the New York Knicks and the Milwaukee Bucks will play at 8 p.m. Eastern on NBC and Peacock. And then the Clippers and the Warriors will play at 11 p.m. Eastern on Peacock. We might have to discuss that another time. Then Wednesday, October 29th, the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Boston Celtics will tip off at 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN, followed by the Los Angeles Lakers and the Minnesota Timberwolves at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. So that does it for me. Thanks for being here and sticking around for this whole episode. This was a great start to Season 3. Make sure to download this episode, like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you next time. Let's hit the rollout.